Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat. This is a podcast hosted by the Institute of South Asian Studies in the National University of Singapore. I am your host today. I am Amitendu Palit, a senior research fellow at the Institute, and I'm delighted to be hosting this podcast today with a very distinguished guest. Our guest today is Dr. Bornali Bhandari. Dr. Bhandari is a senior research fellow at the National Council for Applied Economic Research, in short NCAER India, a prominent economic and policy research think tank based in New Delhi. Dr. Bhandari has had extensive experience in working on India's agriculture and a number of associated policies, most notably the very serious aspects and consequential aspects of distribution of food grains through the public welfare distribution system in India. Dr. Bhandari, we have the great pleasure of hosting you today and most welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Palit, for inviting me to this very interesting podcast show, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Bhandari. Let me reflect on what we aim to discuss today, and this is a subject which is preoccupying the minds and attentions of not just policymakers across world or the region that we belong to, which is the South Asian part of the world, but it is also beginning to rather significantly affect people in all parts of the world, including in South Asia, because South Asia is home to the largest number of poor and low income people in the world. And that is the concern over food security. So, Dr. Bhandari, if I can jump into this conversation by asking the first question, and this is that the world economy is struggling to manage the rise in food prices. Food inflation has become severe in practically all countries of the world. High food prices are one of the major drivers of global inflation. And in this regard, India is not an exception. India is struggling to keep food prices in check. Do you feel that India's policies for managing food prices are adequate?
It's a very interesting question, a very large question, a very broad question, I must say. In a simple, summarized form, I think my answer is yes, it is. But the devil is in the details. While overall food inflation shows signs of trending down in India, decomposition shows quite differing trends. So, just to start the conversation, just to give you a sense of the numbers, available data that is till August 2022 shows that food inflation has moderated in the last months. It still remains quite elevated, above 6%, but still the trending down has begun. So after, just to give a sense to our audience, after averaging around 2.2% in the October to December quarter of 2021, retail food inflation jumped to 6.3% in January to March 2022, and then to 8% in April to June quarter of 2022. And for the 2 months of data that are available, July to August, it has averaged at 7.2%. So that's my first point. While overall inflation is elevated, but it is trending down, at least initial trends show trending down. My second point is that, but that's not enough. We need to look at the decomposition of food items. When we look at the decomposition, when we look at, say, with various composition within food inflation, we find that cereals inflation has steadily gone up, which is rice, wheat, pulses. We find that, and it has gone up from deflation. At some point it was negative inflation in September 21 to 9.6% in August 22. Other items which show inflation are milk, fruits, vegetables, spices, and prepared food inflation. Vegetables inflation in India is in double digits, especially since March 2022. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, in August it was 13.2%. And in India, what makes it complicated is there are spatial differences within across states and also across rural versus urban spaces. A third point about in India, about the food inflation in India, is that it shows persistence. Bhattacharya and Sengupta have analyzed data and they show that there has been a steady increase in the persistence of food inflation across the period since 1990. So in India, I wanted to set the flavor with the numbers. And then I want to say is management of food inflation is a very active thing. Um, and it is both a seasonal and a structural issue. Seasonal because of the rainfall patterns. We know that monsoon is India hits between June and September, which affects agricultural growth. And then we have two seasons, Kharif and Rabi. And then there is a structural issue of structural reasons being given that we suffer from being an emerging country. So the actively what the government has been doing for the last couple of years now, that for actively management in the short run, actively managing prices has been carried out through trade policies, which means is that either they will allow you exports or they will allow not allow exports or imports. They would use exports and imports to manage food prices. Nothing surprising here. Almost all the countries around the world do that. But there have been a host of agricultural policies which will build up agricultural capacity. And notably here, cereals inflation is high, and it is one of the major reasons for food inflation going up in India or staying elevated. But the important thing is the vegetables, and vegetables have a short growing period, and they are very much affected by rainfall, especially unseasonal rainfalls. So that makes it a very challenging exercise to meet with, and that's why we need a strong warehousing policy where, or we can build up warehousing to the last mile so that farmers and we can store our fruits and vegetables, our perishable items. This thing, there's a famous statistic. I don't know where the number comes from, but people quote that 40% of Indian vegetables food gets wasted because we don't have enough infrastructure to store our food. So it's very unlike what you consider with Singapore. A third thing the government has done in the short run is continuation of food subsidies. Along with the normal PDS. So, as late as 28 September 22, the government is providing 5 kilo of free food grains to millions of poor covered under the National Food Security Act. So, the people are getting the normal food rations. Along with that, they are getting free 5 kilo of free rice. So that helps them to actually manage at least any inflation faced from cereals. But of course, vegetables inflation, which is another like potato, onion, tomato, we call it the pot, or you can call it a top. Tomato, onion, potato. These vegetables together do affect the budgets, and for which there is actually not and much protection. So the government is actively managing food inflation. Seems to be that there is some impact of trending down. But is it and it's helping them mitigate for the poor? But we can see that there are differences within commodities. And given the current rainfall again in October, unseasonal rainfall, we don't know what's going to happen to vegetable prices again. So that remains a continuous challenge.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhandari. I think that's a very detailed and contextual explanation that you have provided, and I am particularly struck by the fact that you drew attention to the amount of wastage that is a challenge for India's agricultural sector, and this is all the more, I think, a matter of priority because over the years, as we have seen, the consumption patterns of people have changed very, very significantly, and they have shifted more from cereals to non cereals, with vegetables becoming an important part of the food basket of the middle class and even the lower income classes. So it's indeed a pity that there is still this much of wastage in vegetables, and as you mentioned very rightly, much of it is actually a storage issue. So that part of the infrastructure needs to be lifted and brought to a point where the wastage can be minimized. But I also want to just push you a little further on another point that you mentioned in course of your submission. You alluded to the point of the exchange between countries of food products. And what we see, and we know this for sure when we look at the comparative advantages and the production patterns of countries, that not every country can be self sufficient in all kinds of food products that are required by its population. And to that extent, the logic of making goods cross borders freely and come to the consumption requirements of populations of other countries become important. Now, one of the things that we are noticing is that global food prices and access of countries to food is becoming more and more tighter because of the restrictions that are being placed by countries on food exports. I mean, there are restrictions that have been imposed by India. We have also seen other countries, like, for example, in Southeast Asia, Indonesia was in the news for having restricted the exports of palm oil. Now, one does understand that countries are very much concerned about the first priority being their domestic populations, and to that extent, these items becoming more easily available for domestic consumption. But do you really, at this point in time, given the way the supply conditions are around the world, do you expect this trend to continue, particularly from an Indian perspective? Do you expect more trade restrictions to come?
I think yes. Global food prices that they rose, it was a combination of factors that drove it. We know that the Ukraine-Russia war affected the wheat supplies, with and coupled with crop failures around the world, which led to rise in food prices, and then then the domestic individual countries then reacted by putting restrictions on food exports to cater to their domestic population. And we expect the same thing to happen for rice. Just for example, the area sown for rice in India is 20% lower than that of last year. It's still not lower to compare to normal sowing area, but it's definitely lower than last year. So I think given till the war is going on, I think we are in for volatile times, and that's the reality. And given that given the volatile times, I think the first priority of every country will be to protect their own citizens. I think that's a given. I think what should change here is, and as we, this is a standard thing for any public versus private good debate. When we see that there is a private gain, here the gain is the country itself, but there's a public good failure. I think we will need multilateral institutions to step in and work together to ensure that there is global prosperity. Of course, India has also been signing agreements with individual nations to ensure that people don't suffer. That work is also there. But I think the most important thing for us to understand is that the role of multilateral institutions are very important. So, there's a very interesting anecdote. Bangladesh imports a lot of onions from India. Um, but what we find is that because of this constant change in policy, Bangladesh is now decided to become more independent. Ultimately, it hurts the Indian farmers because they're potentially losing an export market, right? So that's why we need to think in a more sensible manner. There's a private good and there's a global good, and I think we need to think in terms of a global good, where I think India can be one of the many significant players to make sure ensure that the world does not suffer because of these this volatile reasons. I think, but for now, I think the priority will be that each individual on its own, they will each country will if you think in a game theoretic framework, each country will try to protect its own citizen, which also means that they are not thinking of the trade-offs. That means if country X is protecting itself, then it might suffer from from some other commodity, lack of some other commodity. But that's then they work out individual agreements between each other. But if you think about globally, you need multilateral institutions to step in, and that's something to think about. It's something of a rerun of our history, right, in the 60s or 70s, and that's what we need to think about as we go forward.
Dr. Bhandari, one of the points I think which all of us are really, beginning to become seriously worried about is that it's not just a country like India or other developing countries, but even developed countries, and you alluded to the role that multilateral initiatives need to play. Uh, there's this huge struggle that is going on with the management of extreme weather events. And India, along with several other countries, is beginning to experience much higher frequency of these extreme weather events. The number of cyclones, and you and I both belong to the eastern coast of India, and we have seen the high frequency with which these episodic cyclones have been breaking into the mainland, the coastal mainland of India, leading to major crop failures. There's also the parallel occurrence of droughts because of very erratic rainfalls, and the uh, inevitable outcome of all these are an impact on the production cycle, the crop cultivation cycle, and harvest failures, and the concomitant rise in agricultural prices. Now, this, of course, is a situation which, to some extent, makes policymaking a bit helpless because it's not really possible to predict and safeguard against extreme weather events in totality. But even then, accepting the fact that these are really what we might define as heterogeneous events leading to serious consequences for agricultural production and prices. Any kind of specific policies that you might think of or suggest which would be useful?
Given the uncertainty of events, just to make it interesting, I was asked once in a conference that do Indian farmers know about global warming? And my answer was they maybe do not know about global warming like the way economists or scientists know it, but they definitely know about their rainfall, what has happened to the rainfall patterns. They definitely know about that. And how do they adjust and adapt to that is a larger question. The question is I think is we have to think in short term, long term, and medium term. And the answer for it is that yes, India already. I'm talking in per se in India, but that could equally apply to other countries. It applies to India a slew of policies. India has a slew of policies in place which can help it to adapt to the vagaries of climate change, but I think that's not going to be enough. It helps you to adapt or adjust. But how do you plan and how you it helps you to mitigate, but how do you actually plan for it in the future is a different kind of question. And given the that the farmers in emerging and developing countries tend to be very poor, the average size of an Indian farm is only 2 hectares or less than that. Most of them are small marginal farmers in India. How do they actually innovate so that they are protected from the vagaries of climate change is a question that we need to think about. So the question is very different. And let me take the tough one first. How do you plan ahead? Well, do we have a game plan for that? I think this whole debate on global warming, greenhouse gas emissions have to be integrated with this agriculture policy. We need our research and development into various kind of seeds, mechanization, even water management, irrigation, which will help the farmers to actually plan with the different type of cycles. That's one set of policies. In the short run, at least for India, I know that there is many set of policies. The one is, of course, doubling farmers' income, and I think in this medium run anyway, I think the emphasis on improving the productivity, agricultural productivity in India, and for that matter in other countries, is absolutely critical. There is absolutely no way about it. Irrigation has to be done because water management is a very critical thing. Ultimately, you see the Punjab and Haryana, the northern states, which are the bread baskets of India, they don't suffer because they actually have irrigation facilities. How do we ensure irrigation facilities in others? The government of India actually has a very proactive policy, especially on micro irrigation with its collaboration with Israel and others, to introduce micro irrigation facilities, which ensures that you have scarce water but you still have provide water to your plants. The second thing the government of India has done is irrigation. government of India also has policies on farm mechanization, but we need to definitely, India is one of the lowest mechanized countries, lower on the lower side anyway. India needs to do much more to mechanize its farms. Again, it's not that India does. The third thing that India already actually has is an agriculture insurance policy. What we call is a Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana that has been introduced at the central level to in that in case of crop failures the farmers will get the insurance. But at some of the central state governments, as you know, agriculture is both a central and a state subject in India. At the state level, farmers are actually also adapting to the states are giving some of the states are giving assurance schemes to farmers. Plus, in India, at the central level, farmers are given something called an income support scheme, which is called the PM Kisan, which has also helps to farmers to manage if there are any cash flow crunch. So, but you will say, okay, fine, you have a lot of policies, but then what are you doing about it? The question really here is that we do have a lot of policies, but what we need is an integration, coherence way of going forward. Not, of course, we need to improve our policy implementation at the last mile. That always remains a challenge. We need to improve our access of the policies of farmers, like farm mechanization. I've recently worked on farm mechanization, and we realized that farms that while the government has making policies available, but farmers still find it difficult to access, even rent out machines, because renting out itself is so expensive, or buying it is expensive, and you need upfront credit policies. So financial policies, insurance policies, credit policies, access to actual subsidies need to work together for the farmer to help them to adapt to short run phenomena. And definitely we need to have a 50-year game plan to think ahead of what the environment is going to look like and what are the challenges we're going to have, and along with that innovate. Invention and innovation is the only way out for countries like India and other emerging and developing countries. But I think given the Indian strength in R&D, relatively comparative strengths in R&D and others, I think Indian lessons, and given I think also given the diversity in India, especially with so many agro zones, India can actually hold lessons for other countries, both Africa and Southeast Asia and South Asia. And not only that, it can also help other learn, innovate, and which can impart those lessons to other countries. Like you mentioned about the East Coast, innovations in the eastern area could actually can help on the eastern countries in the South Asian side. Similarly, other countries in southern or western areas can help other close by districts.
Bornali, thank you for that very, very detailed understanding that you provided us. In fact, I actually wanted to touch upon one of the subjects that you raised, the role of technologies in this regard. But let me just package it into a specific focus which I wanted to draw out of you, and this is with respect to the area of your intensive work, which is the public distribution system in India. Now, on the public distribution system in India, I have two specific questions to check with you. The first is that we have already discussed high food prices, and to what extent do you think that high food prices are a concern for delivery of food to poor people through the PDS? Because, as we know, the government, the public procurement system is that of the government buying food grains and then putting them through the PDS to consumers, the poor consumers at subsidized rates. To what extent are the high food prices going to be a problem in the running of the system in this regard? And secondly, uh, can there be a role of new technologies, particularly the AI based applications, in better delivery of food at controlled prices to the BDS beneficiaries? So, we'll be grateful to have your insights on these 2 points.
Thank you again for these very detailed questions. I think I'll take the first one. I'll answer the first one about high food prices and the PDS system. But I think to just look at high food prices would miss the point, because we also suffer from very high malnutrition rates. So given that we have high malnutrition problems, but our PDS policy is very much focused on cereals. And if you remember, again, I spoke about that cereals inflation is 8%, but vegetables inflation has been in double digits for the last 5 months. And that's vegetables and fruits. Vegetables inflation actually plays a lot of havoc with our food prices. And of course, it's important for nutrition. So you have to think about how do we address these both of them together. And here, I think could possibly think about reforming the PDS in such a way, public distribution system in such a way, and these are just ideas that yes, the central government continues to provide rations, but the state governments can complement that by providing food in subsidies or food in terms of vegetables to the BPL population. States already run their PDS schemes. Instead of providing additional grains and coarse cereals and vegetables and fruits, could also providing them through that could also help mitigate food inflation, also improve diversity in diets, and also address malnutrition rates. So I think we need to think in a holistic fashion about addressing our food needs. It's not that other states are not doing this. Also, I know it's like Tripura is a small state in the eastern part of India is actually was providing mustard oil and pulses to its beneficiaries. So states are doing that. I think we just need to think about in a more comprehensive manner. But diversification in dietary needs is quite important, and our procurement will also change in response to that. If our procurement changes in response to that, we will expect the farmers um, to also grow diversified crops, which actually will helpful India, because we know that Punjab, one of the northern state, as I mentioned earlier, the bread basket of India, does suffer from groundwater is going down tremendously. So because it's producing rice, which is not its comparative advantage. And also that because of this weather pattern changing, what we find is that it burns the rice so that it can sow the wheat quickly, which causes air pollution all around it. Well, it may not be the major contributor, but it still adds to pollution around those other states. So, given this, we can go away from a vicious cycle that we are set in now to a more virtuous cycle if we have a set of holistic policies. So I think it's time to rethink about how we can use the PDS to even address not only our climate smart needs, but also our malnutrition needs, and also address high inflation. I think that is the thing. There's a lot of discussion in India and a lot of policy movement towards even looking at millets. So there is already a lot of discussion, and I think that needs to be taken forward. The next point that comes to me, that your question was about technology. Um, and here I think there is a role for AI technology. But when you think about AI technology, are you thinking in terms of procurement? Are you thinking in terms of distribution? Because they're two different things. I think in procurement, AI technology definitely has a role to play, and especially across the farmers. But I think what is especially given that we have knowledge about every week this data comes out, how much area has been sowed, how much rice is going to grow, so on and so forth. So we have all that information, so that information can be definitely be used to predict what our production patterns are going to be. In terms of distribution, and by the way, you'll be surprised to know that even in some there is decentralized procurement also in like West Bengal, Telangana, Punjab. So it's not all centralized procurement, and even the payments to farmers that is done on procurement is also on directly deposited in their bank accounts. I think Punjab was the last one which now has joined the bandwagon. So there is a lot of innovations that has already taken place in India in terms of procurement. But of course, there's definitely role for more. And the third on the other side is the distribution part. I think there already India is very interesting, um, because where India has already implemented technology in the sense of India has this Aadhaar enabled public distribution systems. Aadhaar enabled public distribution systems essentially is that, but in it's this is not cash subsidy. This is a in-kind subsidy. That is that if I, Bornali Bhandari, am a beneficiary, I go to the ration shop to get my food ration. I biometrically authenticate myself that I am Bornali Bhandari, and then my allocation will be given to me. Of course, I'm not saying implementation is perfect. It is not, but that's how the system works. It has helped to limit leakages, or definitely deduplication. Ghost beneficiaries have been weeded out. So there is a lot of there is a lot of efficiencies that have been improved, and we have enough evidence to show that, this based on research my colleagues have done at NCR, other people have done, that PDS was one of the better schemes that actually reached out to a wider net of people even during the COVID impact. So that was actually one of India's success stories, and based using the and this was still using this Aadhaar enabled public distribution system. Aadhaar is our unique identity that India has, which is biometrically enabled. So India is already doing that. Of course, there are some states which have cash, but you might say, "Ki, why do you have such a complicated system? Why not move to cash?" The reason is that, consumers prefer in-kind subsidy, and secondly is it's easy, they're familiar with it. That's one thing. It's not just a matter of habit, but also is that, sometimes in rural areas markets may not be nearby, so presence of a ration shop helps them to actually, have have a impact on prices, and of course less price gouging and so on and so forth. So this also helps the beneficiaries to improve, to actually manage themselves. Now the interesting thing that could be that, AI technologies and ML technologies could be potentially be used to upgrade our below poverty line databases. Now our databases in most of the states have been made in, it maybe a lot of years back. Nobody knows the date. We asked them the date, nobody knew the date. And so those, if they those need to be updated, AI and ML techniques across databases could be used to update them, especially. And why this, again bringing it back to the question of environment.
I would want to thank you very, very sincerely for the very illustrative insights that you shared with us. And whosoever has listened to this podcast has certainly benefited from the wisdom that you shared. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhandari. Friends, you are listening to the South Asia Chat, and to learn more about your work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We are available on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everybody.